Good morning to all of you. I'm Trevor Morrison. I'm the Dean of the Law School here. It's my pleasure just to say welcome. Thanks for joining us for this year's conference of the Institute for Policy Integrity, Green States, Energy, Climate, and a Different Federalism. This is one of those gatherings where I think I can say without qualification, there was no more important time than now for this conference to happen, to focus on this set of issues and thinking about federalism as a lens through which to explore really important questions of energy, climate change, environmental protection, broadly speaking. We're thrilled that the Institute for Policy Integrity is hosting and organizing this event. It's a really important part of the overall think tank arm of the law school here. We've got a great many research centers and institutes here, but none more active and energetic than IPI, or Policy Integrity, as it's sometimes known. It was founded in 2008 as the outgrowth of an academic collaboration between Ricky Revesz, my predecessor as dean here at the law school, and one of his former students, Mike Livermore, who's here somewhere. There's Mike, now a professor at the University of Virginia School of Law. They co-authored a really influential book on cost-benefit analysis and regulation, and then created Policy Integrity to study these issues more closely, began to partner with a variety of organizations, major nonprofits, and others, which allowed them to use legal and economic tools to better advocate for regulations that serve the public interest. And in really just a few short years, Policy Integrity has emerged, I think we can all agree, as a leading source of careful scholarship on regulatory issues and an effective advocacy group in its own right, using litigation, public comments, petitions, and other means to influence the shape of numerous very important policy debates and decisions. And much of its recent work has centered, of course, on environmental protection with a strong focus on climate policy. And the event organized here today by Policy Integrity, I'm sure will help us all better understand energy policy in the context of federalism. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Ricky this morning, who will speak next. If I even attempted to give a comprehensive introduction of him, this would need to be a two-day conference. Ricky is truly indefatigable, and by far the most intimidating thing for me on becoming dean of this institution 4.5 years ago was just the notion that anyone would think I needed to live up to the very high bar that he had set. Ricky was a fantastically successful dean of this school for 11 years, and throughout that period remained a really active scholar and policy advocate as well. To have founded and run Policy Integrity while still being dean is, to me, really quite amazing. Ricky is a wonderful teacher as well. He's just a tremendously important part of this law school community and to the communities that you all work in as well. So I'm thrilled to welcome him here this morning and hope you'll join me in doing that. Ricky Revesz.
Thank you so much, Trevor. It's wonderful to be at a law school where there's a great leader, and he takes care of all these things, and we can focus on issues like this one. I remember when I was doing that, and I know how hard it is to keep a place like this with all of its really complicated pieces running, and all of us who are on the faculty and who run organizations at the law school are so grateful to Trevor for his leadership. So thank you so much. And I'm honored to welcome you all to this conference on green states, energy, climate, and a different federalism. So this is our 9th Policy Integrity Conference. Policy Integrity is 9 years old today, or was last month. We're kind of already planning what we'll do next year for our 10th anniversary. So if any of you have ideas, let me know. So this conference has a different feel from last year's conference. Last year's conference, for a number of reasons, took place a week after the presidential election. And obviously, when we said it, we didn't know how the election was going to go, although we sort of assumed it might go differently. But now we were going to have this conference. And we had it. And obviously, everyone was very focused on, well, what's going to happen now to these issues? And several speakers emphasized the same theme, noting the transition to cleaner, low-carbon energy sources was well underway throughout the country, and that state leadership on energy and climate policy would ensure, at least in part, that the momentum would continue regardless of changes in federal policy. It's not that changes in federal policy didn't matter, obviously they mattered a great deal, but that some combination of market forces and the leadership of states could continue to make a big difference. And today, 10 months later, we're getting together to focus on what is happening on the ground in several states that have taken leadership positions on these issues. State actions increasingly define the future of our energy system and will determine our national responses to climate change. The energy regulators, policymakers, and attorneys general who talk today are at the front lines of innovation and are enormously important actors for our nation's future. They're using both policy tools and litigation in their efforts, and in many cases, they're making substantial progress. And as their efforts diverge from federal efforts, they're also redefining federalism in this new era of American politics. Scott Pruitt, the administrator of EPA, talks a lot about federalism. His federalism is one in which states are supported only in their efforts to undermine socially desirable regulation. The federalism of this conference is not the crabbed and tendentious federalism of Scott Pruitt, but the real federalism, in which efforts by states to do what is right are supported and celebrated. I feel a certain level of authority to speak on these issues because years ago, when talking about what the leadership of states was extraordinarily unpopular, and a wonderful person in this room who is on the Policy Integrity Advisory Board, John Cannon, was then the general counsel of EPA. He invited me to give a talk to his staff. I mean, so there was like some ceremonial room, and there were like something like 150 people in that room, and John introduced me very warmly, and then I started talking. And the idea that somehow or other states could play a significant leadership role in this space was not one that in the late 1980s, I'm trying to think what year, sorry, in the early 1990s, it was early in the Clinton administration, in the early I started writing about this in the late 80s, but I guess John had read my article. In the early 1990s, the sort of career people in the EPA General Counsel's office were prepared to accept. Now, of course, everyone now accepts that states have a role to play. Everyone in our community thinks that federal efforts to preempt progressive state actions are a bad idea, that state efforts should be celebrated, and so on. But that actually was not the case 25 years ago. So the world has moved significantly, and because I had a fairly consistent position, I feel some authority to say this now and to celebrate it. And we're thrilled to host a group of leading energy regulators, climate policymakers from around the country who will share their tremendous expertise and let us know about their efforts. And we're extraordinarily lucky that three leading attorneys general are speaking this afternoon. Lisa Madigan of Illinois, who's already here, and Brian Frosch of Maryland, and Eric Schneiderman of New York, who will be here for the afternoon panel at 2:45. Their conversation will be moderated by David Hayes, a former Deputy Secretary of the Interior in both the Clinton and Obama administrations, who, as of last month, is the director of a new NYU center. We have lots of centers here at NYU. This is the State Energy and Environmental Impact Center. And this center will be working with attorneys general around the country and supporting a group of special assistant attorneys general who will help states in defending and promoting clean energy, climate, and environmental laws and policies. David will say more about this effort in his introduction to the panel this afternoon. It's a wonderful initiative that is being funded and supported by Bloomberg Philanthropies. So Trevor gave you a sense of the work of policy integrity. From my perspective, this is a tremendously significant time to do this work. Policy integrity now has 14 full-time employees. We have 7 lawyers, 4 PhD economists, a strategy director, and 2 other colleagues who are policy associates at Policy Integrity. We work sort of at the intersection of legal and economic issues and try to present the relevant arguments in this intersection both to agencies, federal and state, and to the courts. And it's a very good time for some of the issues that we work on. So in all of this gloom, there are a lot of good signs. So for example, in the last month, 2 federal appeals courts, the DC Circuit and the 10th Circuit, held that downstream climate change impacts have to be taken into account in environmental impact statements for major energy projects, a pipeline in one case and mining leases in another. A federal district court in Montana, not like the paradigmatic sort of liberal federal judicial district, held that if the costs of a measure were quantified and monetized, the benefits needed to be quantified and monetized as well, including the climate change benefits, which obviously opens up a great opportunity for the social cost of carbon to be taken into account. I mean, this is an area in which Policy Integrity has worked very hard. I mean, in every regulatory proceeding in which there are greenhouse gas benefits, we prepare and then file on our behalf, but also on behalf of NRDC, EDF, UCS, and the Sierra Club, comments, very detailed comments on sort of the economics of issues around the social cost of carbon, and then pave the way for litigation on these issues. Last year, in a decision in which we filed essentially the only amicus brief to make this argument, the 7th Circuit, in an energy efficiency case called Zero Zone, held that the Obama social cost of carbon number was reasonable. This, in retrospect, I mean, it seemed sort of important at the time. It's much more important now that the Trump administration is really set on maligning it and making it sound like all of this effort is a product of fake science. So I think there is a lot of margin for useful work done at the federal level, primarily in the federal courts, but our focus today will be on this extraordinary avenue for affirmative movement on these issues, which are the states, and many states represented here today and other states that are working in similar areas. So that's the plan. We're going to have 3 panels, one on electricity policy, one on broader state climate change policy, and one on where we'll hear from the attorneys general on the role that they're playing as litigators and as basically at this point the main actors defending significant environmental regulations now that the federal government is on the other side. They played a very important role in the prior administration as additional voices, but a lot of the work was done by the Department of Justice. Now the Department of Justice is on the other side. And even then, their work was tremendously important. Remember, in a Supreme Court argument on one of the 3 big cases that were argued in the second term of the Obama administration, an opponent to a very important environmental rule kept talking about federalism in the states and federalism and federalism and federalism to oppose a regulation. At one point, one of the justices said, well, but it is interesting, isn't it, that there are more than a dozen states on the other side. And the fact that those states were there, even though at that point the arguments were being made as well by the Department of Justice, the fact that the states were there and present and arguing was of obvious symbolic importance. And now it is also of tremendous legal importance. The states can always have standing. The states always have a good reason to be in these cases. I mean, environmental groups and clean energy companies also, but there are some more complicated issues, but they can stand up there representing their citizens, tens of millions of citizens who favor these protections. They've gone through an electoral process. They've been elected. The people have gave them a green light to make these arguments, so they're tremendously important actors, and they'll be the focus today. So we're going to move right on to the first panel, and I'm going to cede my time to the first panel. And I will introduce my colleague, Burcin Unel, who is our energy policy director, very distinguished energy economist who's done very important work in this area. So Burcin, if you could come up with your panelists and we'll just get started. So thank you.